Let me welcome you all. This is a phenomenal group that we have on today, and I think I can safely say it's probably a record for the number of people attending. So thank you all, and we're absolutely delighted. And I suppose from my own perspective, those of you who've been on these sessions before, I've often shared before that I have a very deep concern that we keep customer experience, the discipline of customer experience, really simple and clear. And I'm always concerned that it could be considered a fad, and it is certainly not. When you get into the subject of customer journey mapping, for me, it filters down to that I just hope it is not considered a buzzword. It's absolutely a game changer, and it is a way where you can visualize, clearly, what the journey is like for your own customers, be it B2B or B2C, from the very outset when they first are introduced to you as a brand or a service or an organization, right down to the post product experience. It's a phenomenal discipline, and we today have just an amazing group of speakers who have phenomenal expertise across a whole range of different disciplines out there. So I'm absolutely honored to have all three of you here to discuss this. And of course, we have the safe fingers of Camilla in the background, working everything to make sure it all lands beautifully. So Camilla, thanks again for organizing everything, and this is just great. And what I'm going to do very quickly, let me just make a quick introduction to the team we have with us today. And we're going to cover off three key questions, and we hope to get through this in about 40 minutes. And then we have allowing ourselves a fair bit of time for Q&A at the end, and we're happy to address that. So firstly, I'm going to introduce Melanie. Melanie, again, we've known each other for some time, and I was informed earlier by Julian, who sends us best regards, that we also use the Xero accountancy software. So I'm delighted that I can at least say that we are one of your clients out there, which is great. But Melanie, you are the CX director at Xero, and you've also spent time with the post office in the UK. You've done a lot of journey mapping with Waitrose, and of course the John Lewis partnership. What a phenomenal background, because we admire those brands so much, and it's great to have you on board. Susannah, you and I have worked together over the years, and we both started our careers, I suppose, in the whole advertising world, and we really got to understand customers in a completely different way around messaging and how to engage, etc. And you've gone on, and you're now working. At the moment, you are the business transformation CX lead in AXA Ireland. And you've spent many years working for large organizations across CX, and you've done a huge amount of consultancy work with us in the past. And it's great to have you on board, because I know you have some really interesting and honest insights about some of the issues around customer journey mapping. And then Siobhan, who we've managed to get back to the company, who took some time off. We bribed her to come back in, and she heads up. She's our director of learning, and again has done a huge amount of consultancy across large brands across the world, but also startups, etc. So it's a phenomenal group, and delighted to have you all on board. So kick things off. Let me ask you, Siobhan, if you don't mind, to kick things off. So basically, I suppose if you could just give us a basic introduction to customer journey mapping, why it's so important, the benefits to an organization, and some of the key challenges that people should be looking to face when they start on this journey. Can I hand over to you to start that?
Absolutely. Thanks, Michael. And thanks everyone for joining us. It's fantastic to see such a large group and such a variety of locations represented. So we can honestly say it is very, very clear that customer journey mapping is a challenge that transcends every market. But look, I don't want to preach to the choir here, but I think it's important to talk about what are the benefits and what are the positive reasons as to why we as organizations need to map our customer journeys. And I suppose ultimately it's an opportunity for people within the organization to really walk in your customer's shoes and to understand how the customer and their experience can be improved. And it helps you to understand how the experience matches up to expectations, and for you to really see those gaps between the actual and the ideal customer experience. And look, we know from speaking to our own customers in terms of consultancy and speaking to our learners and our graduates from the academy, that it's an area that people really enjoy, but also find it really challenging. Like it is, from my own perspective, I love doing this work, the customer journey mapping work. I think, you know, you get such energy from it. And anyone who's been through it before will, I think, attest to the energy that comes out of those sessions when you do it. So it's an area that, like I said, people are generally really passionate about, but it's quite challenging. So I'm really not surprised by the interest that we have in today's webinar. It's brilliant to see. And in our CX Academy courses, we have entire modules dedicated to it. So we take you through it literally step by step. So we look at step one, which is understanding your customer, developing those customer personas. So that's really looking at their motivations, their behaviors, their needs, their pain points. And developing multiple customer personas, because it's never one size fits all. Then step two, we look at understanding the customer journey. So that's really about assessing what the journey involves and breaking it down into key stages from the customer's perspective, and identifying what the channels are that they're using, what are the different touch points that are involved, and what are the different teams that are involved. And not just the teams that they're dealing with on the front line, but what are the teams and the support functions that have an impact on this as well. And that leads me to step three, and that is getting the right people involved. So, you know, you need to look around the organization and make sure that you have the right people. And that's people who understand the customer and understand the journey. But you're also going to have people in those sessions who may not understand the customer and the journey, but they have an influence on the journey, and they can really help us to drive that action and that change in terms of improving that customer journey. That's step three, getting the right people involved. Then step four, we talk about reviewing the current journey, the as is. So that's about really capturing what the customer is trying to do at each stage, understanding what their pain points are at each stage of that journey, how they feel, and also identifying any gaps that you might have. So it's really about mapping out that as is existing journey with all of the right people in the room, be that physically or virtually. You know, getting in person, getting people in a room together in person is brilliant. But we understand the way we all work now. We all, you know, the majority of us work remotely, and so therefore doing it virtually is also a really, really common and also a powerful way to do it as well. That's step four, reviewing the current journey. And then step five is about creating that improved customer journey. So that's about identifying those opportunities and those actions to improve the experience for the customer, and ultimately designing the ideal customer journey. That's step five. That is a really quick whistle-stop tour of the 5 steps. And when you listen to that, and when I walk through it, it sounds really simple in theory, and I can see Michael smiling. And that's the same as most things with customer experience. It's really easy to understand, but actually it's really difficult to deliver in reality. And from speaking to people across all sectors and all markets, we know that people struggle with this. And the key things that come up time and time again is, where and how do I start? And also, how do I keep the momentum going at the end? So we've done all this fantastic work. We have all of these wonderful actions that people are so energized about, but how do we actually translate that into real actionable change that is delivered for our customers? So I am not going to give you the answers to that. I am delighted that we have Melanie and Susannah here, who have an absolute wealth of information and are going to talk to us about those particular challenges and their experience of customer journey mapping. But I know there's a Q&A and there's a chat box, so if anyone has any questions, we do have time for Q&A at the end. But Michael, I will hand back over to you if you have any questions.
Well, thank you so much. And it's great. Again, you know, I love it when you say you love this. I know you do. It is such an energetic process. But of course, you know, it's I suppose, Melanie, I'm going to hand over to you now. You know, why we're all energized by it. I mean, we know it's really hard to find exactly how do we start this process, and more importantly, how do we capture the resources within the organization? Who do we get, and all that kind of stuff? Would you like to take it from there? And I know you've got some slides. Am I right?
So yeah, I'm going to pop up some slides, and thank you for that introduction. So I'll just share that now. So as Michael said, my name's Melanie Fischer. I'm the Customer Experience Director at Xero, which is a global accounting software. And today, I really want to bring some of my previous experiences with you. I've been on the journey of customer journey mapping for many years now. We've tried and failed and tried again. But I'm delighted to be able to share a success story with you. Hopefully, you'll be able to take away some top tips on how to set up your customer journey program for success. And Siobhan rightly said, it's knowing how to start, where to start, how much resource you need, and how long to take. There's lots of reasons, as we all know, why you'd undertake a customer journey mapping program. But the one I'm particularly going to focus on today is one that identifies roadblocks, sticking points, or pain points in your customer's journey with the overall goal to improve your customer retention. So before we begin, I appreciate we've got people from all over the globe. So some of these brands you may recognize, you may not recognize. But what I'd like you to all do is just imagine you've decided to change providers for your online grocery shopping. So let's say you love to get your groceries delivered. You've been let down by your current provider one too many times. You've been putting this off for a while and you have been so used to your current provider. You like their loyalty program, you like their prices and products, and you found lately that they've been late. And when you have an issue, it's become hard to resolve. Where do you begin? Firstly, you'll be thinking about what companies you're aware of that do grocery deliveries. You might Google reviews or search top grocery providers. You might look at things such as delivery costs, minimum basket spend before making your decision. You might give it a go once, maybe twice before committing to changing over. You might test out their customer service. You might think about the customer effort. For example, how do you add favorites, amend or cancel a shop? All these steps are going through your customers' minds when they make a decision whether to come over to your company, whatever that company might be, B2B, B2C, and how much time do we as CX professionals dedicate reviewing and improving these steps to make sure we're continually improving our pain points for our customers. So how we're going to talk about it today is I'm just going to expand a little bit on what Siobhan was saying earlier around some of those key steps. The first being about what questions you need to answer to successfully map the customer journey. So some examples might be knowing why your journey mapping is really, really important. Start with your business objective, your use case. For example, are you losing new customers after their first purchase? Being really specific with the case will help you frame your journey better. Second, who are your customers? I think Siobhan mentioned companies like to use customer personas. You might have multiple personas, but this will really help you get in your customer's shoes. How are your customers feeling? Often measured through your customer satisfaction scores, your NPS, your VOC program. I'm sure you've all got different ways where you measure customer sentiment. What pain points do they experience? Now, for these pain points, what I'd like you to think about is what insights can you tap into to understand the pain points? It might be surveys, social media, feedback from frontline staff, data analysis. And then finally, what questions do you want being answered as part of this customer journey? Siobhan mentioned about gathering the right people. And this was a real moment in my career where we tried to do it in addition to our jobs. We tried to customer journey map on the side. We tried to do it within the operations. But actually what we found is we weren't getting the right people in the room together. You need people with some autonomy to make the changes. And by changes, I don't mean groundbreaking technology changes. I'm talking small incremental changes that make a huge difference. For example, moving a help button on your website to make it easier for customers to find. So the types of people you might want involved in your journey mapping program will be CX, UX, customer insight, e-commerce, marketing, etc. So a really good spread of representatives of people involved in this. And the other part is if you wanted to do this properly, is to actually take them off the day job, which I know is hard for a lot of organizations. But what we did is a 12-week sprint where we actually said, hey, we're going to be in a room together and really work on committing the time to this. And then finally, it's choosing what data and tools you plan to use. I'm a big fan of Post-its and flip charts, and I did a lot of that pre-COVID days. But as Michael and Siobhan said, a lot of us are virtual now. So, and I work now on a global company. We use Miro. It's a great tool for customer journey mapping, but also for working in virtual teams as well. So in terms of those 5 stages where that we're looking at, thinking back to the scenario that I identified in the beginning when you're selecting a new online grocery provider. Thinking of those 5 steps. So the first one being awareness. Are the customers aware of your brand? The second being consideration. What factors are they taking into consideration when deciding to spend money with you when they first land on your website? A lot happens before they even decide to make a purchase with you. Third, being engagement. How do you engage with that customer throughout the journey from start to finish when you're building the connections and relationship with your customers? 4, retention. What are you doing to retain that customer? And 5, the gold nugget of CX, as we love to talk about in CX Academy, is advocacy. How do you build that trust and get brand advocates from your customers? So when you map out each stage, it's really important to factor in what your customers might be feeling, what pain points they could experience, and identify which metrics you want to look at each stage. So going back to my examples, I used to work for Waitrose, you've heard of it, a British grocery retailer. And this is a real life case study. It was a 12-week sprint, as I mentioned, to improve our online shopping experience at Waitrose. We were losing customers to the competition, and we really wanted to get under the skin as why this was the case. So again, this was pre-COVID, so we were literally trapped in a room, mapped out the customer journey maps on posters, but you really can use other collaborative tools such as Google Docs. I mentioned Miro. And what we did identify is what the data source is that we use to measure the customer satisfaction at each stage. For example, we looked at Google Analytics to see how many customers abandoned their cart while shopping. We looked at the volume and nature of issues raised to the customer service team, the customer survey data either post-shop or during the service interaction, and sales data for those who completed a journey but didn't return. So we measured those different elements and looked at which were the biggest pain points for our customers. I'll just share with you, this is a very, very simple map where we looked at each stage of the customer journey. We identified the data points to analyze which had the highest pain points. For example, in this instance, the highest pain point was actually post-shop, when a customer had an issue with their delivery, or they were missing an item, or they're unhappy with their substitutions. On this chart, you'll see that the lower the blob, the higher the customer pain points. A little counterintuitive, but what it does is give you an idea of each stage, and you could do this for your organization. What are those pain points? And then finally, we identified the opportunities for improvements for each pain point and used our metrics to measure the impact of each of the changes we made. So just to iterate, this was a 12-week sprint. It wasn't a capital heavy investment project. It was really the simple ideas. So for example, being able to self-serve returns on a website, training the delivery drivers to provide help at the customer's doorstep, and making the Help Me button more prominent on our website. So what we really did is focus on ideas that were low effort to implement, because actually when you look at those, it's far more likely you'll start to see the more immediate impacts to your customers. So that is my just real whistle stop and example of what we did within previous companies I've worked. But yeah, wonderful to see you all today and wish you all the very best.
Melanie, thank you. And Melanie, it's even the example that you've given us there, the simplicity. I mean, we have seen some customer journey maps that look like they were created in a foreign language from a different planet. This is so. I mean, even that is a thought. Did a lot of thinking go into it about how do we keep it simple? I mean, were you ever pushed into no? Let's get a bit more. Let's get a bit more. How do you address that with a team?
Yeah, it's a really great question. One of the things that during the 12 weeks is what we didn't do is wait till the end of the 12 weeks. So each week we had to present back to senior leadership on the progress we've made, which kind of forces you to keep it simple because you're not trying to add more and more to it as you go along the way.
Beautiful. No, I love it. I love it.
Sorry,
jump in, Siobhan.
Can I ask a question there, Melanie? And I think it's something that the listeners will be really interested in terms of getting that commitment to that 12-week sprint, because people are always trying to do this inside of the desk. How did you get that buy-in to get that project worked on in that way?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I mentioned before, we tried to do it on the side of the desk and we really struggled. Essentially, it was the e-commerce director who identified the problem that we were trying to solve in terms of we were losing customers. So it's looking at what metrics we were focusing on. And then essentially we took a proposal to the director to say, actually, one way we could look at this is by doing a dedicated customer journey mapping team. But in order to be able to achieve what we need to, we'd need to take them off the day job. So it was through influencing in that space, but ultimately helping the business achieve the goals that they wanted to achieve.
Yeah, excellent. That's brilliant. Thanks for that, Melanie.
Susannah, I'm going to hand over to you, and I'm asking, I mean, it's funny, you and I in the early days, we saw many Technicolor journey maps sitting on boardroom walls, etc. And we used to kind of smile and go, God, we hope they're going to use those. Yeah, it's kind of in that space. So I think from my perspective, what I'm looking for you to maybe cover here is like from your own experiences, what were the key hurdles to embed customer journey mapping into an organization? So I'm going to hand over to you to maybe address that whole embedding element of it.
Sure. Yeah, I think how I like to look at this is to kind of to zoom out and look at it holistically end to end. And I think really what I'm going to share with you now are 4 key areas where I feel from my own observations over the years, working with many different brands and seeing many different customer journey mapping processes, are the pitfalls that I think that can occur that result in less action at the end stages of the journey. So really it's that rebalancing the energy. The energy tends to sit in it specifically around the mapping work, the mapping effort, and it's just to rebalance that slightly. So the first, number one, I would say is to start the process by defining your customer experience for your organization. And I know this is something that many people don't do, and maybe anyone who's here on the chat might add into the chat if they do, or note if they do have a CX identity, as I like to call it. So this is where the organization sets out what the identity the identity they have is, and what the experience, the ideal experience they want their customers to have as they go through their journeys. So really what we want them to think, it might be something like this brand really understands me or really cares about its customers. What we want our customers to feel, so we might want them to feel valued or feel in control or feel delighted, or if we want to exceed their expectations. And then what we want them to do, so we might just want them to make a purchase, we might want them to tell others, we might want, that advocacy piece. So if we don't have that defined, it's very hard to evaluate the experience as we go through the journey. Yes, we're there on a journey to identify pain points, but we also need to be identifying areas where the journey is just quite bland, or needs to be uplifted, to make it a memorable journey for our customers overall. So when you have that clear definition, it really helps. It gives you that evaluation tool as you go through your journey mapping process, and it also gives you that business case, if you like. We're not living up to the experience. We have evidence here. This is something that combined the organization developed. It helps with stakeholder management as we go through the journey mapping process, because again, we're all aligned as an organization. This is the defined experience we want for our customers. And I think it's just difficult to evaluate the experience if we don't have that. And when we're developing something like a CX identity, you need many stakeholders, many areas of the business to be involved, particularly those trickier areas maybe who aren't customer facing, to be involved collaboratively in defining that experience. So that's definitely the first area I feel is missing. And then as we get into the second point, and I know Melanie touched on that, and it's really just to support what she has just said, it's around that purpose. We need to know why we're doing this. What are we looking to achieve? What is the plan here with this piece of work that we're going to invest a lot of time and effort in? Is it to really get an understanding of the journey, or specifically identify pain points? We might want to look at implementing improvement on the journey. We might have poor customer scores. There might be a very specific area of the journey we want to zoom into. Are we doing this just to open the eyes for the rest of the business? Or are we doing this because we know there's an issue and we need to build a business case to get investment and improvement? So when that's clearly understood and agreed, you've got that buy-in at the beginning. And if the outcome is going to be action, if that's the plan here, is to improve, not to observe, it's to actually improve, then you get your stakeholders on board much earlier in that process. And that really helps later on, because that's the commitment we've all made at the start. So we know what the experience we want them to have. We know what we're looking to get out of this or do with this information. And it's all been lined up. If it's not, it just makes it, you tend to lose that momentum at the end of the journey then, when stakeholders maybe who haven't been involved in the process into that commitment happen. So what does success look like? And with that clear understanding, you're managing internal expectations and you're also getting the support you need lined up. And then the third one is really around the mapping stage. That's the core piece of work there. And here I would say we need to become detectives and we need to become psychologists. And it's really looking at the quality of what we're doing. So the detective piece comes in around gathering and forensically examining the evidence that we have and identifying those gaps. So obviously journey mapping, and Melanie mentioned that, as did Siobhan, that this really should be insight led, and we need to have that information available. I know Terry did a great session here on insights and measurement, and really, we have voice the customer, individuals, experts. We have data analysts and so on in organizations, insight experts, and really to pull together what we have as much as we possibly can. It's literally almost like we're preparing, as a detective would, his case to go to court. We want to lay out this evidence and build a case for improvement and for change. Now, what we often find is there can be blind spots in the journey that we just don't have intel on. And I think, to me, that's a really quality action later on, is to how do we fill that and make sure that we are getting that information that we have, that we need. We can't be sitting around kind of wondering. We need to know factually what are our customers experiencing at each point of the journey. One common yet fundamental omission I do see in most journey mapping processes is this is the psychologist piece, by the way, is that we leave emotion out of the room. We tend to get fixated on the functional aspect. Pardon me. We get fixated on the functional aspect and we tend to leave the emotion. How are our customers feeling? Now, what I would say to you is, it's not good enough for us to sit around the room and guess. I expect they're frustrated with that. I expect they're feeling the impatient or whatever it might be. I expect they're angry. And we don't focus enough on the emotional aspect. Remember, the definition of customer experience is how customers feel about all the interactions they have with the brand. And yet we tend to leave that out of the room. And that's the core of everything we're doing, how they're feeling. So often you can see when you go through VOC verbatim that you may have, you just need to do that troll for the things that they're saying, reading between the lines when they're saying and pulling out how they're feeling, extracting that information. And what I would say, and I've done it myself in the past, there's nothing as powerful as conducting one-to-one interviews with customers. And better still, if you can record that and share that with the rest of the organization. And just being mindful again of the questions that you're asking in those interviews. If we often will say things like, oh, how could we be better? That's a very difficult question for a customer to ask. They don't understand the organization in the way that we do. So it can be quite difficult to come up with an answer specifically. But even if you think about your key drivers, you start to ask questions around that and maybe interview a customer and ask them how important is having your expectations managed. And then, following on with what's the impact on your life, or what's the impact to you if we don't do that well. That's where you get some really rich information out of customers around how they're feeling. So it is important, and you don't always see it. And I remember, I think it was during the summer, I went to an optician's and I was in a bit last minute, as is typical of me. And the process didn't really suit me to get contact lenses. Anyone who wears glasses knows what a pain it is if you have to go on holidays and you're on the beach and so on with glasses on. The process didn't suit me. I had to go down for a consultation. They would order samples. I'd have to come back and get the samples. I'd have to go away and wear them for a few days. And then I would pick what I want and then I would order them. This was the worst possible journey for me. But anyway, I had no choice. I had to go ahead. But when I got to the point of trying the lenses on, I realized the optician hadn't listened to me at all in the consultation process. I was really frustrated with that. And he'd gotten me lenses that I knew before. I already told him didn't suit me. So I knew I was never going to get lenses and I had to go on holidays. But they've never captured that experience in any way, shape, or form. And better still, they've never captured that I was sitting on the beach thinking about that brand quite a bit every time I had to try and wipe sun cream off my glasses, or that I was splashing around less with my kids in the sea because I had to wear glasses so I could see properly in the water. So, where are those gaps and how are our customers feeling is so important. And then we also have to look at things like why people behave the way they do. And that's back to the psychologist piece again. So if customers are doing something wrong on the journey that's leading to a poor experience, we need to understand why this is happening. Sometimes it can be because they're misdirected. Maybe, they're dealing with an agent and the agent is giving them information that's not correct. And sometimes it's because simply it's a behavior that they have within them. It's a behavior set. We do talk about personas, but in each persona, there's lots of different personalities and different behavior types within our customers. And a brilliant quick example I'll share is, and I'm sure you've all probably heard of it, but it's the FedEx example. This is a few years ago. The management in FedEx thought they were doing a great job in their world service centres, and they had this particular customer type they called a frisbees, and frisbees were customers who step in, they drop off packages and step out as quickly as possible. It's a really quick journey, in and out, and it's done. And as I said, they thought they were doing a great job, but then they looked at their customer satisfaction surveys, the results, and they realised that actually it was quite the opposite. And then they commissioned a further study to deep dive into understand their customers and their behaviours. And actually, the frisbees were only about 10%, that the other 90% fell into three different behavioural groups. And one of the biggest ones were a behavioural type called confirmers. Now, confirmers, I'm definitely one. And I know, Michael, from working with you, that you're a confirmer too. Anyone who has to, as you walk into the door of a petrol station after getting fuel for your car, you need to look back one more time to check the number of the pump before you go in. You know you're a confirmer. But they would turn up, they would have everything labelled perfectly, they would know the rates in advance. They just needed things to be organised and happen. You know, it's really about feeling in control and needing to feel in control. And famously, FedEx had this leaning tower at the depots, and the package was literally put in a pile of this leaning tower. Now, it always went to where it needed to go, but for this personality type, they just sent them into another world because they felt unsure that it was going to get to its destination. And this kind of ties into when you have these insights, you know, we would typically in a journey mapping stage go, well, you know, this is our system. It would be a huge cost to put in something completely different to fix this problem. So then these problems get parked. But when you understand the behavior, actually what the solution that they came up with was literally an MDF front on top of the tower, and it had 5 slots with labels on it, so very low cost. And it completely transformed the experience for this customer type because it looked organized. It looked like somebody was popping a package into a particular label, a particular category, but yet it all just went back behind into that leaning tower that they couldn't see anymore. So that's the point. The more detective and psychologists, the more detectives we become, the more psychologists we become, we get that information that can lead to changes that will make a difference and are more likely to happen later on. The last piece I think I'd say is, you know, really around that action piece. This is the key critical part. This is where, you know, we sprint through the journey, as Melanie said, and the journey mapping piece, but the action is the critical. This is the rich stuff. And back to that FedEx example, that's where a brilliant action came out of really understanding our customers. So in this, you know, we're looking at back to the purpose of the start. What was the purpose? And if the purpose was action, then this is where everybody's geared up and ready to do it because we've made this clear at the very start of the process with the people involved. And that's where I said, as I said, the energy is weighted on the mapping bit and not on this bit, which is really critical. So really just thinking about the lack of accountability. So we need people to be held accountable. We need to make sure that we're looking at that the momentum that tends to be lost. So if we have it, as I said, preset that this is what we're going to do, this is the purpose, it's going much more likely to happen. And then looking at the emphasis, often we see in organizations, particularly larger organizations, some very obvious pain points present themselves, and often they can be with big issues like systems, legacy systems or systems that aren't intuitive or aren't connected to one another, pain points for not only customer but employee. And I think really that can be a distraction sometimes. They're really critical and they're important and they're looked at, but these are slow burn fixes. These are big battles to have, and often that can take all the attention and everything else gets parked. So what I would say is, while they need to keep we need to keep fighting the fight to make improvements in that sense, we have to look at the smaller fixes overall that really can have a huge impact. And that's where you start to see the shift on the dial, when we look at the smaller bits rather than just focusing on the big pieces overall. Definitely, I would say it's number one for me. That's the biggest one, is that we get distracted when we get to the end stage of action, and really just thinking about how we might do this too. And I think, you know, there's a lot of actions can come out, a lot of potential actions can come out, is really getting people involved, and not necessarily people who may have been through the workshop journey, but maybe taking teams out, people who are maybe customer facing, a mix of people who aren't customer facing, and getting them to workshop out ideas, looking at the problems, looking at the facts that we've discovered in our journey mapping process. And I think for me, you get the best ideas often because these are the people who are in the thick of it. They understand the workings but also they understand customers better sometimes than we do ourselves. But also it helps with buy-in later on when the actions are indeed implemented, because they know that they're behind it. It's their thinking too. You hear it so often. People say we're never involved in these decisions, and I think they're the best people as far as I'm concerned to do it. And then just that joined up thinking also is the last thing I'd say. When we look at journey mapping, we miss sometimes. I talked about those gaps earlier. Marketing has a huge role, a very important role in any organization, but often it can be a case of the right hand doesn't know what the left hand is doing. And to that point, I'm sure you've all experienced, maybe I go online, I want to buy a pair of shoes, I find a pair of shoes, and you don't have my size. That's it, the end of it. I'm not going to get my shoes. And then I'm later being hounded with some messages, some remarketing, because I've looked at those shoes saying, one last chance, don't forget, we saw you, we're looking at these shoes. And that actually irritates me, because as a customer, because I'm thinking, well, whatever. Or even worse is when I make a purchase and I'm being hounded then. And think about, me, the importance of good personalization. I've just become a customer. I've done everything you wanted me to do. And now you're chasing me with ads and speaking to me like we've never met before. So often that isn't joined up, and that communication, the trail of communication that's going out to our customers, the comms piece, isn't integrated into the journey mapping. So when this pain point is going on in the journey, here's the messages we're also sending, which may irritate the customer further. So just keeping it all joined up overall. So they would be the 4 areas that I feel we need to really look at that rebalance overall.
Yeah. And Susannah, can I ask you, because, again, I think I suspect many of us who are on this call today have this visual of big celebrations. The job is done. We've got this wonderful map completed. People are walking around it under their arm, and they're bringing it into every single meeting, and they're celebrating it. And here's my question to you. Is there a call here to have a second team who could take over, fresh, energetic, to do the embedding of that? Or is it best to keep the same team to do the embedding? Is it, because it's that energy at the end you're talking about. How do you maintain, how do you keep that energy going? Because all that wonderful, hard, strategic work is useless unless we embed it. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, great. It's a great question, Michael. And it's definitely something I see. I think the energy is gone at the end of a journey mapping process from everybody. And as Mel mentioned earlier, there's so many different types of current customer journey maps. Sometimes I think we can overwhelm ourselves with the detail in them too, that it just becomes too big a problem. But I think that's it. It's in the same way we would address our customers. Every organization is different, and it's really down to how the organization is set up, the culture. But I think absolutely, as I said a moment ago, if you can take sub teams then afterwards peppered into different parts of the organization and really have that collaboration approach to address the issues, let that team off who've been going through the trawl of the journey mapping, is an absolutely brilliant way to do it. Definitely.
Melanie, any thoughts from your side on that particular question? We've done all the hard work. Is there some tricks out there that you might have leveraged to make sure the energy is seen throughout the whole process?
Yeah, I think the main thing for me is that stakeholder engagement piece. Like in the example that I used, it was the group that did the journey mapping who also made the changes, but it didn't mean other people were involved in that. So the communication, the engagement, the presenting things in a really simple, compelling way meant that we were able to influence the stakeholders who needed to be involved in those changes. But yeah, absolutely need to keep up that momentum and have a defined endpoint too. I think it's sometimes a bit open-ended. So, well, this is our list of priorities, like being clear on what you can achieve in the short term and what the quick fixes that you can do today versus what's actually going to go on our program of change for next year.
Well, this is great. This is great. And let me move into it. And we're bang on time. So thank you all for we've nailed the 40 minutes exactly. And there's a load of questions coming through. And if you don't mind, let me, Charles asked a very interesting note here, of which Jamie, thankfully, you've given us some good insight, but it was all about, Charles, you were asking, how do you define the pain points? I mean, how do you do that? And is this surveys with customers or just insight? And it was quite interesting, Jamie, you kind of said, look, there's no need really to start surveying this. There's survey fatigue to beat the band. These are things that the internal staff would generally be able to identify. Can I just open that question? Maybe Siobhan, could I ask you to, what are your thoughts? Do you survey, or is it in the head already, the pain points?
I think it's a bit of both. I think it's, if you have voice of the customer data, it's so important to use that. You know, we've gone to the effort of asking customers to give us their feedback. We have to action that. So it's really important to use that. Use whatever data you have. But speaking to, was it Jamie's point? Speaking to your frontline staff who are involved in the journey and speak to your customers on a daily basis is going to give you a wealth of knowledge. You're going to get deeper insights, and you're probably going to get more than you would get in your VOC, because the person who's on the phone or in the office or speaking to your customers face to face, they understand the emotions that the customer's experiencing and the impact it's having. So, you know, they can really bring it to life. So those internal people using the data that you have, but also we've done quite a few journey mapping sessions with B2B customers where they've brought in key clients into the room to do those sessions. So you're not assuming anything. You're not guessing what the pain points are. You have the customer in the room with you. Now, that will only work for specific cohort, but I think for B2B companies who have, you know, key customers, doing that and getting the customer involved in it is a really, really useful way to do it. And also helps to build relationships when customers feel that they're being involved in improvements as well.
And on that note, I mean, what are your thoughts about, do we require in the B2B world, where you have significant clients, you know, big clients, would you do a customer journey map for that one client, or is it for all clients? And what are your thoughts around that?
I think if you do it, we've seen people do it with one client in particular, but what you will find is that the learnings that come out of that, they're not all going to be specific to that client and the actions that come out of it. You're going to have learnings that and pain points that come out that actually are pain points for probably, you know, a large cohort of customers outside of that one particular client. So I think you have to, you know, you have to look at it with both lenses on, and, you know, but yeah, I think you can do it with that one client in the room. But the key thing is that you have your data, you understand the journey from the customer's perspective. You're using what data you have. You're using the insight from the customer-facing staff and the support staff. Potentially, you know, they will have valuable insight as well, and they can tell you why certain things are happening. And you know, Michael, you would be first to say this. You know, we've been in sessions before where there's light bulb moments between support functions where they're like, oh, that's actually what I'm doing here is causing that issue, and it can be fixed really, really quickly. So I think it's different for every organization, but you know, it really is a mixture of insights from internal and external.
Yeah, no. Melanie, by the way, there's a lot of people saying, can they get access to that last slide again, where you show the before and after? And so let me tell everybody, yes, everyone's going to get this recording, so you'll be able to do that. But Mel, one of the questions that was asked is specific. How do you measure the impact of the before and after? Did you see that? It's a question. Were you able to put a measurement in each of those gaps to know that you were making progress along that journey?
Yeah, I mean, it's never an exact science, right? But what we did is put some measurements, the metrics and tools that I talked about, and then it gave us an indicative what that would do to that pain point. So, for example, where we were just talking about those issues and how we gather that data. So we looked at, like, where is my delivery? That was our highest contact volume. People wanted reassurance that their delivery was on its way. So we looked at actually, when we made the change and put the delivery tracking in the website so people could go in and self-service, you're directly measuring that against your contact volume with where is my delivery. So what you want to be able to do is identify the measures that can attribute to that customer, whether it's pain point or what's coming through your surveys. But in instances like that, it's going to be different what the customers are surveyed through your CSAT VOC program versus what your contact center contact volume. So this is what I find really interesting, is when you bring those two together, you can really start to make those improvements.
Beautiful, beautiful. Susannah, I remember when we started out in the early days, I used to love listening to you and watching you, how excited you got around developing personas. And you were like an artiste, you know, you were just drawing everything and you're putting. And so my question that's coming up here, and it's one we've heard before, is how many is too many? You know, I mean, do you do personas for small groups, or does it change dramatically for B2B versus B2C? What are your thoughts about, the volume of personas, or is it just an ongoing journey where you're constantly adding new personas? What are your thoughts around that?
Slightly mixed on the personas, I'll tell you. But I think it depends. I mean, you're analyzing the data that you have on your customers, and that's how you're developing your personas based on who they are, and what type of products they use. Their demographics, general demographics, and so on. And really, that depends how much, how big your customer base is, how many customers you have, and so on. And then you start to see those categories appear, those segments. As I said to you, my only watch out with personas is just that we've different personality types within them. So, 3 males aged 35 to 45, homeowners with 2 kids, almost identical profile. When you get into the personality types, it can change, and one could find things very easy to navigate journey wise, and others could struggle with it. Some are visual, some like to read. It really varies. So they're great as a guide, but it's just to be mindful that we're dealing with different personality types. We're trying to cater for everybody within it. But really, it depends. The answer to your question is just how big your customer base is and how many segments sit within that, or how many of the larger segments sit within that.
No, I love it. And Melanie, can I bounce one back off you? Mohammed has asked here. It's a really good question. It's one that we kind of avoid, but I heard you mention something. He talks about the technology impact from what sort of technology is out there to guide us, to help us, and I'm sure that's a very broad conversation. But have you any tips on that, about where you start to identify what sort of technology is out there?
That's a big question. I think, when there is so much technology out there, one of my favorite things that I like to do is go to customer engagement seminars, listen to webinars. I went to a CX summit in London last week and really was a real great taster of all the different technology out there. I think with AI being such a big part of customer experience now, and experiencing like what works well with AI and what doesn't, my other advice would be to speak to other companies who implement it, because I know within Xero we've tried and failed, and we've tried again with AI, and now the new model that we're seeing has got vastly improved. So yeah, between CX communities, LinkedIn's great, but attending and getting those providers, they're often the sponsors of these events. You can get a bit inundated afterwards with emails, but at the same time, it's a really great forum to see what technology is out there from a CX professional's perspective.
Yeah. Any comments from you, Susannah, from your experience on tech, or is it a very specific area that people should just go wide and bring IT in? What are your thoughts? And Siobhan, I open that to you as well.
Sorry there. I think so. I think it's very specific, really. And I think it's using those with the intel, within your organizations as much as possible. Siobhan, what do you?
Yeah, I'd agree. I think there's no one size fits all when it comes to a customer journey mapping tool or technology. It really depends on the organization and the approach. I think, like Melanie said there, it's about, reaching out and speaking to other people who are using them and how they're working. And there's new tools coming on board, especially with AI. There's new tools being developed every day. So it's really, to me, when I had a conversation with a graduate about this recently, and they were looking at different tools, and we generally try and avoid recommending specific ones for that very reason. There is no, it all depends on the organization, but it's really about thinking about your needs, in terms of how are you going to use it as a company. What kind of templates do they give? Are you limited in the different templates and how you can customize it? Can you track version management really well if you're working collaboratively? There's lots of different considerations that you need to think about, and integration into your other systems. How does that work? Is it clean? Is it easy? And the user experience on the systems themselves as well. So, in short, there is no one size fits all. You need to assess and understand your needs, see what's out there, and like Melanie said, speak to other people who have used them before to get their real life experience.
Brilliant. Mitu has a great question here. I'm working with a client who are trying to improve response rates on the voice of the customer surveys. They're all very long, so drop off is an issue. But if there was a switch to a pulse, will they lose the richness of these longer surveys? Any thoughts on the surveys that we're creating out there to help us identify some of these pain points, etc.? Any thoughts from either of you on that?
I'm happy to jump. I'm happy to jump in. I'm very passionate about customer surveys and getting that sweet spot between the amount of information that you want from your customers and not having long, unwieldy surveys. So my advice with always these is try and keep it relatively short. Really focus on any information you're getting from your customer you want to be able to take action on. I think there's two bits for me. One about making sure those unhappy customers are actually getting a contact back. So you don't want to be asking too many that you're getting lots and lots of feedback, really focusing the feedback on specifically what you want. So we changed our survey to be focused on the service we're providing, because often we were finding they were answering what about the technology and data and things like that. So really tailoring your questions around that. And I think in terms of getting the response rate up, incentivization is always great, although obviously it's hard to incentivize if you are linking to Trustpilot or other review websites. But if you're not, you know, at John Lewis, we used to put a monthly gift card, and that went down really well, and customers really like that. So I think thinking about other ways, and obviously volume, that will help it. The more customers you send it out to a certain degree, the more you'll get back. But in my experience, I think you end up with so much data. Like, I wouldn't worry too much about if you're saying, well, if I get a 5, 6, 7% response rate, great. You've still got a really good representative sample of your voice of your customer.
No, very, very interesting. Susannah, there's a question here that says, regarding your step 2, in terms of, now I've lost it. There's so many questions coming in. That's typical. I had it and now it's gone. Step 2, your purpose. You gave some examples. If you wanted all clients to renew, clients to be advocates, etc. So the question here is, how do you prioritize your purpose for clarity? Any thoughts on that? Sorry, I'm not hearing you there. You're on.
Sorry. I was just looking at the question there. There was just one word at the end I didn't understand in the question, but just around the purpose really is, it's really collectively agreeing if you're looking at what the business is trying to achieve, and the ambition of the business overall. You know, if there's an issue around maybe loss of business, you know, sales reduction, losing customers, retention is obviously been impacted, or so on. You know, that's really where the priority is, and I think that's the fundamental piece. We know customer experience is all about being human, and to all of us customer experience evangelists, it's the right thing to do. But for business, this is you know, these are businesses we're talking about, and this is all about money. And so wherever the opportunity is to improve things from a financial perspective, be it we're losing customers, the renewals, for example, may be low in an organization, we're not hanging on to our customers, advocacy isn't really happening, and so on. So I think that's another really important one, that we're led by that. We're led by the business, because you're going to get the buy-in from the business if we're addressing areas that matter to them, that are going to impact on them. And then you're showing, again, this is a great example of showcasing the impact of action and change, and then you'll get much more buy-in then for more projects later on down the line.
Yeah. And listen, sorry, thanks, Susannah. And here's a question that's just come up from Valerie Whelan. Do you have any recommendations on reading for customer types? E.g., Susannah mentioned confirmers. What are the other types out there? I mean, that's a really interesting question. And if we can't answer it today, I think it's worth our while, Camilla, to do a little bit of work, and let's issue some links around that question. It's a fantastic question, because it is one of the more enjoyable aspects of it. Just in general, the three of you, have any of you any thoughts on that in terms of reading? Is there specifically any reading material that you tripped over that you could recommend here today, or is that something we'll do as a follow-up? Any thoughts?
I think can be specific to organizations. So, for example, the FedEx example I gave you earlier was around that the analysis that they've done. They used, I think, behavioral science and data analytics combined to explore and understand their customer type. So it really can be specific to organizations. There isn't in the world just an actual pure set of behavior types. So it's just trying to understand. I think the likes of Bain, I think, have some great articles around different personality types, and even Harvard Business Review, I think, have done some really good pieces as well. But definitely worth a trawl. You know, that confirmer one, jeepers, that's, you know, as I said, when we all understand what that's like, you know, and they're the confirmers are actually quite prevalent in society. Like, there's a huge amount of them, and I think, you know, these are the people who, if you don't send them a note when they've made, you know, maybe, you know, the delivery update, for example, they don't know where they stand. They're the ones picking up the phone or trying to use chat to get in touch. So the more we manage them, and give them the detail they need when they need it, then we're reducing the cost to serve in the organisation.
I
So
love it. That is so right. Anybody else, Siobhan, or any links or anything in particular that people could go to, or is that?
No, I'd agree with Susannah on it. It's very there's no one list. It all depends on every company has a different cohort of customers, and every customer is different. But I think yes, absolutely, Harvard Business Review are just some really, really good stuff there. But actually, I'm a little bit excited now to do a little bit of research and see, is there something out there?
Great
I
question.
think it's probably around the behavioural psychology lens. I think maybe doing some research around there. So I might do a little bit of digging and see if we can find
Well,
something to post to our
we can put
LinkedIn.
those links on the courses too. I mean,
Yeah.
we do that generally, etc. Melanie, there's a question here from Kevin, and he's saying any high level differences in B2C, say with with your Waitrose, or B2B, say with Xero, that you could share. I mean, what are your thoughts? What from your perspective? You've now worked in both of those markets. What are your learnings around customer journey mapping in particular around that?
Yeah, I think I did read that question earlier and I was having a think about it. I think there are some real similarities. Ultimately, you've always got a customer at the end. So even though at Xero, we work with our accounting partners, we also work directly with small businesses. And I think when you're looking at your customers' needs, whether it's your B2B, B2C, how you use your customer journey maps and identify those pain points isn't going to be vastly different. So how you want to look at how you resolve those might be. So your customer intention in terms of I want to get in and out and do my shop versus I want to be, I'm an accounting partner with a big organization, and how I earn we call them partner points with the number of organizations they signed up. So the problems they're trying to solve are different, but how you go about that customer journey map, I would say, in my experience, it's very similar. Different people involved in it. I think Xero is very much focused on the sales team, so we look at more data from the sales team than perhaps I previously did at my Waitrose experience. So insight from both of those parties as well. But yeah, great question. Not something I've often reflected on. So thank you for calling that out.
No, that's good. And Kevin, thank you. He's also suggesting here, by the way, for the previous, that the CX Pillars book gives great insights on detractors, passers, and promoters. So thank you for that. It is much appreciated. Now, everybody, there are literally hundreds of questions here, and as normal, what we will probably do here today, because I'm conscious of the time, we've got 2 minutes before winding down, and I wanted to just say thank you to everybody. There's some fantastic insights for us to think about and to respond to, and I think from our perspective, this has been a significant webinar on our perspective. It's been one of the largest attendance we've had. We've had some really interesting discussion here today. And of course, this has been recorded, and we will be sending this to all of you, and you're very welcome to pass it on to your colleagues, etc. Come back to us with any other questions. What we will tend to do is we look at specifically some of these questions, and we will respond to them and follow up. We did this the last day with Terry, and we spent practically 2 or 3 hours trying to answer all of these questions, but we did get them done. It'll take probably about a week before we complete it. But we promise you we'll come back to you on that. Have anybody, Siobhan, Susannah, Melanie, any final thoughts to finish up with? Because there's loads of people are fantastic response, very, very happy, and they are delighted with your feedback today. But any final thoughts before we kick off?
I'd just like to say thanks to everybody for attending, and to say, look, please do reach out. You'll find us on LinkedIn. We're always open to questions and to support you. So wishing you all the best of luck with your customer journey mapping.
Brilliant. Melanie, anything to add?
I guess my 3 words of wisdom is keep it simple. I think we touched on that quite a lot today. Don't boil the ocean is the other one. But I just want to say thank you for some great questions coming through. It's been a really interesting discussion, and look forward to more of it.
Susannah, do you think we have got the people to realize that a lot more energy required at the tail end of this project than just the middle meaty bits?
yes, of course. I think it's just that rebalance the energy. The early bit, the pre-planning bit is critical, and the end bit is critical too, and just to rebalance that. And what I would just say is keep it human. We're humans dealing with humans, and that tends to get left out of the room, and that's where we lose the impact.
Yeah, and throughout this whole session, there's been a few questions about AI, and we will attempt to get back to you with some thoughts on that, and how that can have a positive impact on CG mapping as a process. So, look at everybody. Thank you so much, and as always, Camilla, thank you. You've done a great job. A phenomenal number of people here today, and on behalf of all of us, thank you for organising this. It's been great. So well done. Take a bow. Thank you all.